Chapter 6, The Politics of Public Opinion and American National Government. Continuing our approach here of providing my direct lecture notes that I would normally in a face-to-face class provide over 150 minutes in a week. I'm condensing these down. These are straight out the reading. They're in no way comprehensive, so make sure you're doing the reading in addition to listening to these lecture notes. Basically, I'm going to walk you through them like I would do in class. So we've broken the chapter down into 4 parts, and the first part is the nature of public opinion. So public opinion is a collection of popular views about something, perhaps a person, a local or national event, or a new idea. So it's basically what you think of something. It's what everyone thinks of something. It's opposing public opinions. It's minority opinions. It's majority opinions. It's just what people think of stuff. Most citizens base their opinion on their beliefs and their attitudes, both of which they begin to form in your childhood. So beliefs are closely held ideas. That's supposed to be ideas, typo there, that support our values and expectations about life and politics. So it's things that you at your core believe and that you may or may not advocate for. Attitudes are affected by your personal beliefs, which we just talked about, but also represent the preferences we form based on our life experiences and values. So you may have religious values that drive your opinion on abortion. You may have a parent that was passionate about the political process that drives your passion for it. You may have parents that were disinterested, which drives your disinterest. So you may have had something happen to you in your past, maybe subjected to, say, racism or sexism or some sort of other ism that has made one particular issue more hot button for you and you're passionate about it. That affects your attitude, which then affects your beliefs. So all this is socialization. Well, political socialization is the process by which we are trained to understand and join a country's political world. And like most forms of socialization, it starts when we are very young. So again, some of the things we were just talking about with our attitudes and our beliefs, we could watch our parents or our guardians, how they behave, how they interact with the political sphere. Now, there are agents of political socialization. What's an agent of a political socialization agent, or what is a political agent? You may hear them called any of those things. An agent of political socialization is a source of political information intended to help citizens understand how to act in their political system and how to make decisions on political matters. So, for example, your family can be a political agent. The school you attend can be a political agent. Your church is most certainly a political agent. They affect how you see things. They affect your beliefs and attitudes, thus they affect your political opinion, your public opinion. Your friends affect how you behave in the political sphere. The media that you consume on a day-to-day basis absolutely affects how you view the political sphere. Now, there are 2 different types of political information coming from all these places. There are covert content, which is political information provided under the pretense that it's neutral. Hey, fair and balanced. We're all humans. We have our biases, and everything is never fair and balanced. Overt content is political information where the source discloses that the content is only one side of this message. I am so-and-so, and I approve this message. It's like a big political attack on their opponent or something like that. That's overt content. Now, towards the end of this first section, we get into something called the political spectrum and ideologies. And there's an example I like to use in all my classes, economics, business, whatever. And I call it the beach, if you will. And we're going to kind of put some labels on the beach here that make it not a beach, but stick with me for a second, if you will. Let's imagine we're on a beach. There's a left-hand side of the beach. There's a right-hand side of the beach. And there's like a buoy or something floating out here. On the left, it looks all black. And on the right, it looks all, on the right, it looks all white, if I could speak. So the further you get to the corners, like if you're way over here in the left and you're looking hard back at this thing out in the water, everything looks black, right? This is all you can see. Well, if you're all the way over here on the far right and you look, all you can see is white. All I see is white. So in the political sphere, you have people that are over here thinking people over here are idiots. You got people over here thinking people over here are idiots because the right's saying, hey, that's white, and the left saying, no, that's black. And they think, I can't believe you can't see the world how I see it. That's the same thing. When you look at it from a political spectrum, you have the far left, there's a few people there, and you have the far right, and there's a few people there. they're not the majority. The majority are towards towards the center. That's where the most of people are, and there's some people in between either way. Most of us are actually centrist, as they would say. Um, if you extend this to political systems, ideologies, far left, I'm talking like way far left, you have communism. As you move a little bit right, you have socialism. As you move a little right to that, you have liberalism. In the center, you have independence. Then as you move right, you have conservatives. As you move further to the right, you have authoritarians. And then you go all the way to the right, and you have fascists. So you have fascism. Like dictators, okay? Now, there can be dictators on both sides. Communism is like the few who have and most that don't. Fascism is the few who have power and the most that don't. You have authoritarians, which are moving towards dictator. You have socialists, which, boy, you need to take macroeconomics. I can tell you all the kind of problems with that. Then you have people who are more liberal, people who are more conservative, and then most of us here in the center. If you're sitting here in the center, you can look at this thing out on the water and say, you know what? You're an idiot and you're an idiot, because it's not just black, it's not just white, it's black and white. So that's the majority of us. The problem is we tend to have television that's hard over here, television that's hard over here, and then a few idiots on either side who are just going back and forth. That's my scientific term for them, idiots. There we go. All right, moving on to the next page. Hope that helped. Second section. How is public opinion measured? Well, it's polling, and you got to be careful who we're polling. We'll get into that. Straw polls are commonly passed along as like scientific polls. Straw polls are informal polls that collect opinions of a non-random, population or group. It's like, hey, let's just grab some people. We don't really know their circumstances. They can be black, white, whatever. They're not going to represent what's going on in the society. It might be a pack of people leaving a Republican convention or a pack of people leaving a Democratic convention, and we're going to pass it off as scientific. These are quick and easy, and they're cheap. Newspapers and social media traditionally use informal polls to collect information about issues, elections, etc. A poll that is actually worth its weight is called a formal poll. It has a random sample of a limited number of people from the overall population, selected in such a way that each has an equal chance of being chosen. So if you have 10,000 people that live, let's say, in your town, and you want to take a random sample of 100 of them, certainly it would be too expensive and prohibitive to survey all 10,000. But if you could throw them all in like an Excel spreadsheet and spit out some random numbers and get some random people, you come up with 100, chances are you have a pretty good random sample. You can also have a representative sample, which is a group of people whose demographic distribution is similar to that of the overall population. For example, if you have a town of 10,000 people and 60% of them are white, 20% of them are Hispanic, and 20% are African American, you would want your representative sample to be broken down the same way, 60, 20, 20. If you had 10,000 people in your town, let's say you had some people lived out in the country, some people lived in the urban, suburban area, you would want a representative sample of both. A lot of polls come out of, like, say, New York City, when everybody's just, well, they're from New York City. That doesn't really represent what's going on, say, in Kansas. So you have to be careful to have a representative sample. This costs time and money, which is why people default to straw polls and try to pass them off as formal polls. It's very frustrating. And you also need to know what a formal poll's margin of error is. It's the number of states, number that states how far the poll results may be from actual opinion. So, for example, if you have a poll that says presidential candidate A leads over presidential candidate B, or let's say by 3%, but the margin of error is 10%, that's no bueno. Because if you have one candidate A leading one candidate B by 3% and the margin of error is 10%, candidate B could be winning by 7%. That's a margin of error. That's very significant. So if you have a very tight poll with a big margin of error, be skeptical. So how do you tell a good poll from a bad poll? Look for the numbers justifying its legitimacy. You need to see this a random sample, representative sample, and has a margin of error. Informal polls should be taken less seriously. Margin of error should be present and as small as possible. We just went through that in my previous example. Number of respondents is it high enough to be representative? So, for example, with your town of 10,000 people and there's 100 responses, okay, that's somewhat pretty good. But if there's 10 responses out of 10,000, that's not a great poll. Okay. And then also, a lot of people don't look at, hey, when was this survey done? Because, especially in big political campaigns, surveys done a month ago are ancient history. What's happened? 4 weeks worth of news cycle has happened. So you've had 28 days. A lot can change in 2 days, much less 28 days. Much less 6 months ago, a year ago. That's ridiculous. Is the data recent or old? Rely on recent, rely on formal polls, and make sure they give you things like, hey, this is what the sample looks like. Here's how it represents society. Here's my margin for error. Some technology and polling issues. Traditional polling was face-to-face. That's become less of a thing. More virtual now. How was it obtained? The zero should be a closed parentheses there. I'm human. So how did you get this virtually? Was it just something you gathered online? Was it an email? Did you have a telephone call? Did you do it over the internet? Methodology matters. Is this something you got off Facebook, or is this something that you actually collected yourself? There can be some problems there. Speaking of poll problems, in addition to the issues listed above, some polls have two common problems. Number one is timing. So we talked about the dates and the timing. And did you conduct this poll right before presidential candidate A had like a media gaffe or did something stupid? That could change the poll. Or said something stupid or did something stupid. Timing matters. Human nature, we all have bias. That's just human nature, man. We can't help it. We can be aware of it. Human nature, when you're doing these polling, face-to-face, virtual, telephone, or over the internet, your questions might be leading. For example, what's your opinion on the death penalty? Pretty open-ended. I can figure out what's your opinion on it. A leading question would be, don't you agree that the death penalty is cruel and unusual? You see the difference there? What's your opinion on the death penalty? Versus, don't you agree that the death penalty is cruel and unusual? Am I kind of giving the answer in the second question? Yes, I believe I am. So you have to be careful with leading questions. There's something called the Bradley effect. Now, Tom Bradley was a guy who ran for governor of California. This theory is that voters who answer polls are afraid to admit, for example, that they would not vote for a black man because it would not appear to be politically correct or racist. So you could be neither PC or racist, and you just like the white guy better, let's say, for example. Tom Brady was this guy who was leading all these polls, and everybody's like, he's a really nice guy. I don't want to be seen as did I say Brady? Did I say Tom Brady? Yeah, Tom Brady seems like a nice guy. Tom Bradley effect, he was a nice guy. And people just didn't want to admit that they were not going to vote for him. So in these exit polls and in these informal polls, they were saying, yeah, I like him. I'm going to vote for him. But they'd go in the polls and they were voting for the other guy because they thought, he might be a more effective governor. I mean, it's wild. They even named it after him. Bradley effect. Crazy. Exit polls are conducted during an election, and interviewers stand outside polling places on election day and ask voters how they voted. There's always the possibility poll results will be wrong or skewed. They can come in and say, hey, did you vote for candidate A or candidate B? And I can say candidate C just to get them out of my face. So I'm just, you can totally lie to those people. So you could also just catch a bunch of people who voted in a group, maybe together, they came from work or something, and they all voted for the same person, but then you didn't catch the other groups that came and voted for the other person. So they can always be skewed and wrong. Push polls are political information from campaigns presented as legitimate polling. There's a ton of that. Oh, this poll says this. I'm Joe Biden and I approve this message. Or we're going to win bigly, huge. Okay, look at the polls. Political information, okay? They're not Gallup. They're not independent. They're not some university that's trying to do a random sample, representative sample with margin of error and do face-to-face polling and get out there and do it right. So be careful. Chances are, if it's a poll and it ends with, I'm so-and-so and I approve this message, it's not a good poll. What does the public think? So experiences that affect public opinion. This is section 3. Citizens rely on two methods to form opinions. Heuristics, which are common rules of thumb or cues or shortcuts for decision making. Humans are lazy. We like to take the short way. Okay, trust me. I see this in my class. You guys try to skip the reading and all this stuff, man. It's not going to work out well for you, but you're using a heuristic. It's a habit. The most common heuristic are voting by political party. I'm Democrat. I'm just going to vote straight Democrat. I don't even know anything about the candidates. I'm just going to pull the lever for D. Or I'm just a Republican. I'm just going to vote all Republicans. I'm just going to pull the lever for R. The most common heuristic, again, is voting by political party. Other heuristics include deciding by a single issue, maybe race, social justice, gender issues, abortion, etc. Maybe that's, hey, are you pro-life or are you pro-choice? That's how I vote, and I'm voting for all pro-life or pro-choice. Those are heuristics. Versus the second approach, which is research. Now, that's learning background information before making a decision, examining a large array of information to decide. That takes time, and people, like I said, are lazy and they take shortcuts and they use heuristics more times than not. What I would challenge you to do on a personal level is if you've always voted Democrat or you've always voted Republican, ask yourself why. If you were related to people that they've all voted one way or the other for a political party, ask yourself why. You can't tell me in the history of man it's always been the Republicans the right person or it's always been the Democrats the right person. That's a cop-out, man. Do your research. I'm proud to say I have voted for both parties. Heck, I've voted for parties you haven't even heard of. So make sure you do your research and you're not just relying on heuristics. Now, there are certain areas that are just not of my interest, and I probably do more heuristics type stuff. I grew up on a farm, but I don't pay a whole lot of attention about who's going to be South Carolina's next agricultural commissioner. That's just not in my wheelhouse. So I tend to vote one party over the other there. Truth be told, I call my dad. He's a farmer and say, hey, who should I vote for here? You have something called political elites, and they affect your experience. They affect your public thought, your public opinion. So these are people who are important political leaders who also shape public opinion. Classic example would be, say, for example, if former President Obama comes out strong on incumbent, I want to say strongly against, but strong on, so against incumbent President Trump, then voters that admired Obama may form a strong opinion against Trump. So if like Obama was your boy and he comes out against the guy who's running against someone who's in that same party but not necessarily your boy, you can say, you know what, if Obama thinks, for example, Biden's where it's at, then I'm voting Biden. And see, a political elite just affected your view of a current race. So, opinions about politics and policies. Some opinions sway over time. There's a nice little thing in your reading about surveying over time where opinions change. It's like a graph goes up and down, yes or no, positive or negative opinions over, say, abortion. And then some opinions remain cemented over time. You're like, no matter what, I'm pro-life. That, for example. So, some change, some don't over time. Last section here, the effects of public opinion. First part, a theory of delegate representation assumes that a politician is in office to be the voice of the people. Now, this can be kind of dangerous. I mean, it makes sense, but it can be kind of dangerous. So issues are really on your focus right now. So like issues are more of a focus of voters when candidates are facing off in an election. Like, hey, here's how I feel about this. Here's how I feel about this. Here's how I feel about this. Here's how I am on national defense, that type of thing. Those things are like right in your lens and on the focus of the voters. Then let's say your person either wins or loses. If they lose, you assume the other person is not even going to do anything with it. If your person wins, you just assume that they're going to take care of it. So issues remain somewhat important, but lose focus once the candidate is in office, only to bubble back up for the next election. Voters expect, quote unquote, their candidate to follow through once they're put in office. So you expect them to do what they said during the campaign. A lot of times we don't see a lot of follow-up. Favorability polls measure how positive voters feel about a candidate. This is where Hildebeest, Hillary Clinton, went sideways against Trump the first time through. National polls, a lot of informal polls, we talked about that on the first page, had her leading. And so it was like a shock. But people just didn't like her. For whatever reason, they just didn't like her. It had nothing to do with, it had something to do with Trump, of course. But they just didn't trust her. She wasn't very likable. Okay? So her favorability polls, people just kind of dusted off and said, she's not a very favorable person, but she'll still win. Guess what? She didn't. It came down to favorability polls. Bandwagon effect is where the media pays more attention to candidates who poll well during the fall in the first few primaries. This is really big in presidential primaries. So they subsequently pay less attention to fading candidates. So we just came out, we're in 2020, we're just coming out of heading into November. We've got Biden versus Trump, and let's go back to Biden. Let's go back to Democratic primaries. Biden won Bernie Sanders won an early primary, and then Biden won several in a row and started getting more attention. He actually gained steam, whereas people like Harris and Buttigieg started losing steam. certain people get bandwagon effect. They get popular, and people start following them a little more, and certain people don't, so they fade. So that really happens in primaries a lot. Horse race coverage, and like an actual horse race, and down the stretch they come. The media calls out every candidate's move. In first place is President Trump in the primary, and then in second place in the Democratic, blah, blah, blah. They're given like the play-by-play. Candidates move throughout the presidential campaign. They announce winners and losers. All right? And this affects how you perceive the viability of each candidate. You're like, all right, Pete Buttigieg just can't beat this person. All right? If you put this Democratic primary person against an incumbent president, they're going to lose hands down. If you put this one up there, they have more of a chance. If you have coverage like that coming from the media, it affects who you think is viable. All right? Horse race coverage. The impersonation of a horse race thing was absolutely free. Horse race announcer, that is. Public opinion can affect how government officials are enacting their policy and governing. So, for example, if people lose confidence in, say, a president, they may not let them, the public opinion might come out pretty strong if they're trying to appoint a new person to the Supreme Court. If, let's say, in November, Biden were to beat Trump stays in office until January 20th. Biden comes in on January 20th. It used to be March, by the way. Trump could try to push through a new justice to replace Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Public opinion is going to have a large effect there because it may affect people in the Senate. You kind of want to stay ahead of the curve on public opinion and stay in people's good graces. That said, public opinion may be that go ahead and put your person in there. So it's very interesting. It's an interesting dynamic we're facing as a country right now. So just keep in mind that what the effect of public opinion, what people think, how it's measured, holy smokes, and your nature of opinion, huge, okay, bigly. Very, very interesting, very, very important to the political spectrum. Thank you for listening to this lecture. I hope you're having a great week so far.